Chapter 5 Partridge Hunting, Peter Pan. Hunting was always my hobby, not because I had that great killer instinct, but because I enjoyed the company of the guys I was with, the stories, the competition, the walk through the country, fall or winter, and a chance to unwind the tension of a busy fruit season. Let me describe my first attempt at partridge. Del Pierre and Jack Orr invited me, and we headed out about 4:30 a.m. Our destination was Orangeville District, and we arrived in good time on a beautiful fall day. Both Del and Jack were experts with a shotgun, and they had their Springer Spaniels with them. I had an old hammer gun and one 25 box of shells, and not a clue about hunting partridge. We parked the car on a country road and walked into a rather thick poplar bush that had plenty of wild raspberry canes, a good cover for birds. I was driven center position, which should give me the advantage of the efforts of both dogs. Birds were not that plentiful, and in spite of the excellent performance of Margot and Peter Pan, all the birds seemed to be in front of me. It happened that no matter where I wandered, I was shooting at birds. Del and Jack got 2 or 3 birds each, with as many shots, while I shot the whole 25 and scored only once. Don't think I didn't take a razzing. They both threatened to dispose of the dogs and hire me. Those damn birds seemed to have the knack of rising from the ground at 100 miles an hour with a real roar to about 10 feet higher than my head. They usually went straight ahead because of the men and dogs on each side of me, but if there was a tree of 3 inches or larger in front of me, they knew exactly how to keep it in my line of fire until they were all out of range. I finally learned that if you were going to get one, you had to be fast enough to shoot before they leveled off. I'll tell you, there were a lot of trees with shots buried in them in that bush. All mine. John Locke's Peter Pan, a wonderful liver and white Springer Spaniel, was born in the spring of 1942. Del Pierre bought him as a small puppy from John Locke's kennels in Burlington. Del and Marie were childless, and I think they must have raised Peter as most people raise a child. They were living at Fruitland, directly across No. 8 Highway from Ralph Knappman, and as I have mentioned before, Del and I were rather close friends. It was most interesting to watch as Peter progressed in size and knowledge. In the spring of '43, Del entered Peter in the field trials of the Niagara District Branch Bird Dog Association. It was Del's first experience in the field trials, and certainly a first for Peter Pan. He gave an outstanding performance and won 3rd in the puppy stake, 1st in the novice stake, a stake for all dogs who have never won in competition, and 3rd in an all-open stake in competition with veterans of all ages, quite an impressive record for the first try. On April 15th and May 6th of '44, Peter won 1st in both all-open stakes. This, we learned, rather was a rare event because those boys in the Niagara District were very reluctant to allow outsiders to take away any of the honors. Del was really disgusted with their display of poor sportsmanship. It was quite evident that they intended keeping all the honors amongst themselves, regardless of the fact that the trials were run under Canadian Kennel Club rules. Most of the entrants were kennel owners and very anxious to increase the values of their dogs by having champions, so it was a case of, you win this year, I'll win next. In order to have a champion dog, it was necessary to win all open stakes 3 times under CKC rules. It is most unfortunate that Peter was never given that honor, which we so obviously won in following trials. In 1945, Del became ill with 2 strokes and died that summer. His passing was a great loss to the community and especially to me. It was over a year later that Marie decided that it was a shame to keep Peter from winning his championships and decided to sell him to me. I entered Peter in the spring trials of '47 and was lucky to get 3rd in the gun dog stake. That fall he won another 3rd in the same stake and 2nd in the open. By this time, he had won the admiration of all the spectators attending the trials. It was really heartwarming to receive congratulations from about half of the 100 or so people watching the trials as I came back from our turn. Statements such as, "I'm sure glad to see Peter finally won first," or "There's no way you could beat that performance." "How does it feel to own a champion?" or "Glad to see him win," etc., etc. All added to my own conviction that Peter was top of the list. Then came the disappointment of hearing the announcement over the PA. So-and-so first, Peter Pan second, so-and-so third. It was about this time that I met Dick Henderson, and he entered his dog Penny in the novice stake. Dick was a barrel of fun on any of the hunting trips or at the field trials that he thought as much of Penny as I did of Peter. And, as usual, the winners were announced at the end of each stake, and Penny had won first in the novice. Dick was pretty excited, as usual, and wanted desperately to attend the banquet being held that evening in St. Catharines, at which time the prizes were to be presented. We rushed home to announce the good news of our wives and change our clothes for the occasion. We stopped here first, and after a few comments and laughs, Dick jumped into his own car and took off for his home. In about 5 minutes, Dick came to the door looking like a cat which had just swallowed a canary. In his enthusiasm, he forgot to take Penny from my car to his own and was nearly home before he missed her. We went to the banquet and enjoyed a good meal. There were a few speeches and finally the awarding of prizes. This was one time I had not entered Peter, so I was not anticipating anything for him. After the open stake and the gun dog stake came the novice. First prize was not Penny, and by the time the winner had received his certificate and sat down, Dick was boiling. I have never heard a group of men take a more severe bawling out of my life. In a calm but positive manner, Dick explained true sportsmanship and all the ways the Niagara Bird Dog Association failed to qualify. It was interesting to note that not one argument was presented on their behalf after Dick sat down. In the fall of '48, Peter was awarded first in the member stake and second in the gun dog stake. Perhaps I should explain how a field trial is run. Most stakes had about 10 to 12 entries coming from all over the countries, and sometimes from the best kennels in New York State. There were always 2 or more judges, and each judge had to see every dog do its bit. It was important that each dog had fresh ground for his trial. 2 dogs were run at the same time, one judge with each dog for half of his trial. Then the judge would change places for the other half. The dogs were first positioned about 45 yards apart in a sitting position, and some points were won or lost according to how well he behaved. Then, as his handler, you were asked to proceed forward while the dog followed at your heels. This was called heeling. While this part of the trial is in progress, men are placing live birds about 100 yards ahead of each dog. In the spring trials, they use pigeons, and in the fall, they use pheasants. In either case, the birds were swung at arm's length until they were too dizzy to fly, and then tucked in the grass with their head under their wing. They would usually stay until flushed by the dog, except in the odd case, then you have a runner. The handler knows approximately where the bird is, but of course the dog does not. You are required to direct your dog from side to side in front of you, and he is judged according to how well he covers each square foot of ground, how far out he works, and how well he takes orders to sit, to change direction, and to come back to you. You are supplied with an expert gunman in all stakes except the gun dog stake, in which case you shoot your own bird. The tension mounts as you approach the general area of the bird, and Peter had the knack of zeroing in much sooner than most. His excitement registered in his tail, and when it was double time, you knew he had found his bird. The last 10 yards, Peter would travel in a straight line at less than half his normal speed. This gave you plenty of time to be prepared. When the bird flushed, the command was "hup," which meant that your dog was required to sit while the gunman downed the bird. The dog was required to remain sitting until you received the order from the judge to fetch. About half of the total points were awarded for retrieving. Most dogs would mark the bird's fall and run at full speed in that direction. After the bird is found, points are given for the speed with which he retrieves, how direct his course, and how gentle he handles the bird. Any broken skin could lose all your points for retrieving, regardless of how well he had performed otherwise. If the bird happened to be still alive, he would deliver it without harming it. The dog must return directly to his handler, the quicker the better, sit on command, and drop the bird into his hand. This completed the trial, and the next pair of dogs were ready to go. If this sport were run with any degree of fairness, I can think of no other sport that could come even close to this excitement. The unpredictable happenings, the pride of ownership, or the teamwork between man and dog. On one trial, Peter was very reluctant to cover the ground to my right. I knew it was important to cover both sides of center, but every time I forced him to the right, he would run a few yards in the direction and then never veer to the left again. After several tries at this, the judge said to let him go on his own way. It did not take him long to flush the bird he knew was there, 40 yards to my left. It was a wild native bird, a runner, and not supposed to be there at all. One little cocker spaniel sat patiently waiting his turn. When his owner said, "Let's go," he refused to move. Absolutely contrary to his past performances. No amount of coaxing or commanding could move him from that spot. Finally, rather disgusted with this dog, the man walked towards him intending, I think, to get him moving one way or another. As the man approached his dog, up flew the pheasant. The dog had no intention of looking all over a 10-acre field for a bird that was right in front of him. The owner quickly forgave him when the dog retrieved a big hand from the audience. The last trial Peter ran was in the spring of 1949 at Power Glen near St. Catharines. They were using pigeons. By this time, both Dick and I were fully convinced of the folly of entering the all open. To spend $5 for the entry fee with no hope of winning seemed to be a waste of hard-earned money. However, the gun dog stake was considered to be much lesser honor because there was no championship at stake and therefore a possibility they would give Peter the prize if he won it. Dick said, "If you can just hit that pigeon, I know Peter will do his share." We went against 8 other dogs, among them one owned by Fred Stickles. Fred was one of the poor sports in the group and the owner of a large kennel. Peter put on his usual nearly perfect performance and, wonders will never cease, I hit the bird. Fred's dog broke when the bird was flushed, but we were still tied for first place. The only way to settle a tie is to have another runoff. I should mention that Fred was a crack shot and my reputation as a gunman was rather poor. It was rather obvious the aim was to have runoffs until I missed my bird, in which case I would lose half of the total points. Lib, Florence, Tom, and Dick were more excited than I was by the time the runoff came. Fred was already celebrating victories with a little drink at his car. The second run was duplicate of the first. I went first and alone. I had missed my bird, the trial would have been over, but I fooled them. I hit it. Fred's dog broke again and also made a sloppy retrieve, but we were still tied for first. Dick was pretty despondent, really angry, and thoroughly convinced that I could not hit 3 birds, especially pigeons, in one day. I don't mind saying I shook a little when it was my turn. There is a good half-hour time lapse between runs, so Fred is getting higher all the time. Peter was not the least bit tired and the biggest show-off in the world, and of course the audience was 95% in favor of Peter winning. Peter was great, and the bird flew straight away from him, giving me as easy a shot as possible. Down it went, and I think by this time even Peter was proud of me. I could hear our own group yelling from way out in the field. Then it was Fred's turn, and by this time he was actually staggering a little as he took position to begin. It is little wonder that he missed the bird. In fact, it is a miracle he did not hit his dog. He was so mad that he threw the gun on the ground and jumped on it, and with both feet breaking the stock. Well, anyway, they had no chance but to give Peter the prize. There is a big write-up in the St. Catharines Standard, pictures and all, about how well Fred's dog had performed, only to be beaten by the veteran field trial dog Peter Pan. Also an article in Rod and Gun Sports magazine. Peter never became a champion in the records of Canadian Kennel Club, due principally to the actions of Lowe's and the Niagara Bird Dog Association, but to all those who knew him, he was a champion of champions. I wonder which was more important. I do know of this. If I had to choose between taking a gun or taking Peter on a pheasant hunt, considering pleasure to be the only reward, I could have easily left the gun at home. It was at the fall trials of '48 that the classic of all episodes took place. Lib, Florence, Tom, Dick, and myself, and of course the two dogs, Penny and Peter, were all there for the big day. They were using pheasants for the trial with the understanding that the birds not used would be released to bolster the pheasant population in the area. They were being held in crates which held 8 or 10 birds each. Before the trials were half over, one of the handlers, though carelessness, no doubt, allowed several of the birds to escape. They scattered in every direction, and Dick watched one land about 200 yards further down the lane. He said, "I think I will take Plenty down there and give her a little practice." I was too close on to my turn, so Lib and I stayed with the group, and Flo and Tom went with Dick. Penny had no trouble finding the bird, and when she flushed it, it flew into the only large tree in the 10-acre field. These birds had been raised in pens and were not afraid of people, just dogs. Dick sent the kids back to us to fetch his shotgun. I was out with Peter on my trial, and Lib was reluctant to send the kids back alone with the gun, so she accompanied them. When they got back to Dick, sure enough the bird was still perched in the tree. Dick loaded the gun and then decided he just couldn't shoot a sitting bird. No amount of yelling would make him fly. Dick said, "Lib, if you will walk a little closer on the other side of the fence and pitch some of that loose dirt at him, he will probably take off." Lib followed his suggestion, climbed the fence, and proceeded towards the tree. When she thought she was within pitching distance, she bent over to pick up a piece of dirt. At that precise moment, the bird took off and Dick fired. It was a good shot, and the bird fell, stone dead and bleeding, right in the middle of Lib's back. For the next split second, she was certain she had been shot, especially after looking at the blood all over the hand, which automatically reached back to feel what had hit her. Consider this: the time she bent over, the time the bird took off, the time Dick shot, and the direction the bird flew, all had to be perfect in order to have this happen, and the odds that it would happen again must be well over 1,000,000 to 1. Dick tucked the bird behind a fence post in the grass and to be picked up on our way home. The kids were asked to be quiet about the whole thing and were rather disturbed to think that they had done something really wrong. Later, when Dick had a chance to talk to me on the quiet, he said to me, "I know you are not going to believe me, but I am going to tell you anyway. I had to see the blood on Lib's coat to hear the whole thing from her before I was convinced." End of chapter 5.